Lukashenko really liked the plan, the American, Russian-American, or whatever you want to call it, the one with 28 points, which will obviously be changed in some way, but this is the first draft. Well, Lukashenko is practically drooling as he says that this is a real story, that this war in Ukraine could actually be ended. Here's a fragment of his speech. Take a look.
There, with Putin, we'll try to build a high-speed highway, finish up this drawn-out mess, I think in the near future in Ukraine, and then we'll focus on our own internal affairs so that our people can live better, so that they understand there's nothing better than our land.
That's it. Enough of this dragging on. That's all. That's the story. So what's really happening in the Kremlin right now? You know, today, at the initiative of Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, a phone call was made to the Kremlin following the negotiations that took place in Geneva, as well as what happened at the Group of Seven summit in Johannesburg. Erdogan was there and he informed Putin about all these developments. But here's the thing, Geneva understood and Johannesburg had to change its agenda because the news from Europe, from Switzerland, obviously affected both the statements and the mood, as well as the message that everyone expected from the G7 at that very moment. And so that message was delivered. So basically the exchange of views between Erdogan and Putin, look at what Kremlin News reports, which is the official Telegram channel of President Putin's own administration. An exchange of views was held regarding the situation around Ukraine, including in the context of the American proposals for a peaceful settlement. Vladimir Putin noted that these proposals, in the version we have reviewed, are in line with the discussions at the Russian-American summit in Alaska, and in principle could form the basis for a final peaceful settlement. The Russian side's interest in a political and diplomatic resolution of the Ukrainian crisis was once again confirmed. From this statement, don't you get the impression that in principle everything is fine? The Russians, I've been reading a lot of reports lately, and it's all like, the Russian Federation has backed down again, there won't be any negotiations, nobody needs this at all. But then you open, this is news from just an hour ago, you open the official Kremlin Telegram channel and read. They are proceeding in line with the discussions at the Russian-American summit in Alaska, and in principle could form the basis for a final peaceful settlement. Interest has been confirmed. And I'm adding here one more video. This is a video from Friday evening, which actually, this video and this post, they are basically the same. Take a look. During
the negotiations in Alaska, there was a pause from the American side. And we know that this is connected to Ukraine's actual rejection of the peace settlement plan proposed by President Trump. I believe that this is precisely why his new version appeared, essentially a modernized plan now consisting of 28 points. We have this text. We received it through an existing channel of communication with the American administration. I believe that it too could serve as the basis for a final peace settlement. But this text is not being discussed with us in detail. And I can guess why. The reason, I believe, is the same. The US administration has so far been unable to secure the consent of the Ukrainian side.
Yes, it's clear. Yes, Alaska, Anchorage, commitment, we're interested, that's all. And today, once again, I am showing this official statement from the Kremlin that, yes, they spoke with Erdogan, Putin proposals, they've reviewed them, we're moving in this direction, basing everything on a peaceful settlement, everything's great, yes? Now, what exactly is needed and how, in fact, can it be done? Let me explain. For example, here's another Telegram channel that's close to the administration of President Putin, but to a slightly different faction. This one is more aligned with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and figures like Lavrov, Ryabkov, and who else? Chepa, from the Duma's International Affairs Committee. So here's what they write, that Belousov, the Russian Minister of Defense, has set the task to fully liberate the so-called DNR by January 1st, 2027. Then they go on to quote, saying that some people might be shocked that the DNR will not be liberated in the near future. Of course, we want everything to happen faster, and we will try to speed up the liberation of Donbas, taking all necessary measures for this, but we need to set realistic goals. The Ministry of Defense cannot promise to liberate the DNR before January 1st, 2027, since there is no confidence in this, and they do not want to make empty promises. But we are moving forward. Everything will be fine. Perhaps as a result of some negotiations that are currently being planned, the goal will be achieved earlier, not by military means. But we are military people, so we proceed based on the situation on the battlefield. Yes, not a word about the fact that now 28 points have been negotiated. And Belousov is raising the issue of a free DNR by January 1st, 2027. In 13.5 months, that is, for 13.5 months, in some paradigm of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, the so-called special military operation will continue, and so on and so forth. Today, we are opening yet another such source. It's called the Institute for the Study of War, and their analysis, which they conduct regarding the information space currently present in the Russian Federation. So the analysts, the Institute for the Study of War, an American analytical organization, let me remind you, cites statements from Russian officials, in particular the ones I mentioned. Ryabkov, who is deputy minister to Lavrov, right? On the 22nd, which was the day before yesterday, Saturday, he said that Russia cannot back down from the demands of its leader, Putin, which he declared in Alaska. Well, that's all standard, but then it goes on to discuss the root causes of the war. The first reason, Ryabkov specifies NATO expansion, the deployment of weapons in Eastern Europe, and discrimination against the Russian language and the so-called Russian Orthodox Church. That's what Ryabkov says. Next, they quote Zhuravlyov from the State Duma Defense Committee and Chepa, whom I also mentioned, from the State Duma Committee on International Affairs. Zhuravlyov says that threats exist on Russia's borders, and this is absolutely unacceptable for the Russian Federation. So how are we supposed to stop anything there? Chepa, on the other hand, mentions tomahawks, referring to the idea currently discussed in the Western press that as a security guarantee, Ukraine should be given tomahawks, which supposedly Ukraine would not use preemptively anyway, because their use would be controlled from Washington. But even this doesn't really satisfy anyone there. Chepa also hints that Russia perceives any assistance or security guarantees for Ukraine as a threat to the Russian Federation, and Russian state media interpret Chepa's statement as a warning as to why peace is generally impossible for Russia, especially on the terms that obviously the Russian Federation itself sets. Through their representative Kirill Dmitriev, they made a proposal and worked it out with Vektriv in Miami a month ago. So, well, that's strange, isn't it? So that's the kind of aggressive story we're dealing with. And there's another story gaining traction, which is also obviously connected to some kind of hawkish faction in the Kremlin that's now really savoring the conflict reported by the Washington Post, right? So the Washington Post as well, where The Economist was the original source, and this is about the conflict. More specifically, the contradiction is between Vance and Rubio, the US Secretary of State and Vice President. Here in the photo, you see Yermak, because right now Rubio is playing solo in this whole story. He's trying to steer the entire negotiation track back to a point where Ukraine's position needs to be openly coordinated first, and only then should something be proposed to them, rather than what happened last week when Vance's representative, Army Minister Driscoll, came to Kiev and presented Zelensky with a fait accompli. But obviously, this whole story is also quite double-sided and very close to the Kremlin and the Russian Federation, because they're having almost the same thing happening in parallel. We have Putin and his office making certain statements and commenting on things externally, like phone calls with Erdogan. Again, I want to emphasize externally. And then there's the story with Lavrov and all sorts of people like Ryabkov, Zhuravlyov, Chepa, and so on, who are clearly relaying something to the domestic audience. And they reinforce each other. And so, yes, there are two directions that somehow coexist, but not very well at all. So, in order to fully understand what's happening, why Putin says one thing, and then messages from all sorts of people like Belousov or his representatives appear saying something else, you just need to understand how the information machine works in the Russian Federation. Friends, you have to manage the minds of 150 million people. That's why there is communication with the citizens of the Russian Federation. And then there is communication with the bureaucracies, right? Internationally, with Donald Trump, this is generally accomplished through the press, through various media channels. That is exactly why there are sometimes discrepancies. So when you start consuming all of this information at once, of course you can get confused. But the official position of the Russian Federation today, as I personally see it, is simply this kind of formal reply. There is discussion along these lines of Russian-American relations and what was announced at the highest levels in Alaska, and in principle, what could form the basis of a final peaceful settlement. You all know about this 28-point plan, right? Which in essence actually boils down to 3 main points. As Vance himself said, this is supposed to satisfy both Ukraine and Russia. It should ensure that the war will not happen again and there will be no further invasion. And the third point, I can't quite remember, but it's less significant. And obviously today, the Russian Federation is actually satisfied with this, and everything else is just rhetoric aimed at the heroes of the special military operation who are dying for reasons that are unclear. Indeed, it's not clear at all what they're dying for. And that's why they need to communicate in the spirit of messages like Belousov's, so that God forbid a revolution doesn't start in Russia. This is a serious issue and a serious matter, so don't confuse one thing with another. These people are doing their job there. The leadership of the Russian Federation is busy calming things down, because casualties on the level of 1 million, which Trump talks about, are no joke. This is a serious matter.